One of the most important questions I'm asked all the time is, should a couple aim to avoid fighting at all costs? And the answer is not necessarily. According to John Gottman, one of the leading marriage researchers in the world, he believes that arguing sometimes is a normal and natural part of a relationship. He says you should try to avoid arguing. Sometimes arguing allows you to assert yourself, express your needs, work through feelings with your spouse. But he says arguing is not a problem. The problem is how you argue. You need to argue in a certain way. And if you do that effectively, the arguments will not be as damaging. Let's take a look, however, at 4 ways that you could hurt each other by arguing in the wrong way. And Gottman calls this the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. In fact, he can show you scientifically, he can predict up to 97% accuracy if a marriage will fail based upon the fact that they're using these 4 negative horsemen in their relationships. The first of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is what Gottman calls criticism. I have to tell you, one of the most poisonous things in all relationships is criticism. When couples come to see me for help, I'll notice right away, are they highly critical or are they accepting of one another? If a spouse is always being told what's wrong with them, they're going to feel miserable. If they're always told they do this wrong, they do that wrong, they're going to not feel very good about themselves. And when a person is criticized, most likely they're going to do one of 2 things. Either going to criticize back to the other person and escalate the fight, or they're simply going to withdraw from you. So it's extremely important. You're allowed to argue, but reduce criticisms. Try to stay on point on the subject. Talk about your feelings. Talk about it as objectively as you can, what you believe is important, but don't criticize the other person. The second of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is contempt. Contempt is the next stage, the next logical stage past criticism. Contempt is when I don't just disagree with you. It happens when I don't like you. I don't like something about you. So for example, let's say a kid spills milk. So if I were to criticize a kid and saying, hey, you spilled the milk, well, that's not the best thing. There's better ways of saying it. But contempt happens when you turn to the kid and say, you're a terribly sloppy, miserable kid that's always making a mess in the house. What you're doing is you're attacking the essence of the other human being that you're with. It could be a child, it could be your spouse. When you attack them on such a personal level, that's called being contemptuous. You want to avoid that. If a couple gets to the level when they're fighting of contempt and disliking the other person, it's going to cause a tremendous rupture in the relationship. The third of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is called defensiveness. Defensiveness is a very destructive mechanism in many relationships. Defensiveness is when a person does not take responsibility for their behavior. I've seen this all the time in my practice. One person will attack the other person for something they did wrong, and they may have done something wrong, but the person doesn't take any responsibility. If you don't take responsibility and you start saying, it's not true, then what happens is things just get much and much worse in that relationship. Defensiveness means that I don't take responsibility for what I've done wrong. And if you don't take responsibility for what you've done wrong, it's simply never going to get better. So I tell couples all the time, it's okay to lose. Stop being so defensive. You don't have to win in every argument in the relationship. Sometimes you can say, you know something? I hear what you're saying. I did something wrong. Now, there might be several reasons why I did this wrong, but at least I'm admitting I did something wrong in that relationship to the other person. If you reduce defensiveness, you have a greater chance of arguing but not hurting the relationship. And the 4th and final horseman of the apocalypse is what Gottman calls stonewalling. Stonewalling is a psychological term used to describe when somebody starts withdrawing from the relationship. And I see this so many times in marriage. Sometimes people behave in a way we call passive-aggressive. What does passive-aggressive means? Passive aggression means that I'm angry at somebody, but instead of saying it directly, I kind of do it indirectly. Withdrawing from your spouse is a form of passive aggressiveness. Withdrawing means I'm just not going to talk to you. I'm going to ignore you. Sometimes I hear people complaining that their spouse will suddenly start coming home late every single night, or just not be available, or not answer their phone calls. I had somebody recently said they WhatsApped their spouse and he didn't respond for a few hours. and the wife felt terrible. They were having an argument beforehand. She wanted to kind of apologize and resolve it, but he just wasn't available. So stonewalling is another negative thing which people should avoid at all costs. So to conclude with, it's okay to argue sometimes, as long as you're not using these 4 negative strategies. There's respect for the other person, there's a lot of listening, and most importantly, if you're arguing, you stay on point and you maintain a lot of goodwill for one another. Welcome to this new series on Hidabrut called Marriage Matters. My name is Rabbi Schonbuch, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist based in New York and around the world via Skype. On this important series, I will be answering your questions you have about marriage, relationships, dating, parenting, and about any issue dealing with family and relationships. But more than what I have to say, I want to hear what you have to say. So please email to this address and send in your questions, and I'll try to answer as many questions on this new show.